Before we begin recording audio, we need to know a few things about the VST Connections window. Open project number 13, VST Connections. You can open the VST Connections window by pressing F4 on your computer keyboard or by going to the Devices menu and choosing VST Connections. This is the area in Cubase where you can define all your audio inputs, outputs, group effects, external effects, and a few more. We'll talk about the inputs and outputs in this video, group effects in level 2 of this tutorial series, and the rest in level 3. The first thing you probably want to do is make sure you have some audio inputs so you can record. Make sure you watch the video on audio setup so that you have your audio hardware set up and ready to go. Now let's set up our inputs. We're going to create 3 different inputs. If your sound card only has 2, then don't worry. I just want to accommodate everyone's needs here. Whether it's 2, 8, or 16 inputs, it's the same process to set up the inputs. Let's say you have a keyboard with stereo outputs hooked up to your sound card, 2 inputs 1 and 2, or left and right. You'll want to create a stereo bus to accommodate this. Let's remove any buses that we already have here and start from scratch. Select the bus, right-click and choose Remove Bus. Click the Add Bus button and add a stereo bus. You can also select how many buses you would like to add. Right now, we just want 1 stereo bus. Since we're hooking up our keyboard's outputs to the stereo 1 and 2 inputs of our sound card, we don't need to change anything under the device port. Inputs 1 and 2 are automatically selected. You might have noticed that I have a lot of inputs on my sound card, while you may only have 2, maybe 4, or 8. Let's move ahead, assuming you have more than 2 inputs. If you don't have any more inputs, then this is all the setup you'll need to do. We can name the input by double-clicking here. Let's call it Keys. Now suppose we have a microphone hooked up to input 3 on our sound card. Let's make another bus, but this time we'll make it mono. Set the input to number 3. If you only have 2 inputs, left and right, then you can do this. Set the mono input to the first input, or the left side. Let's call it mic. If you have multiple inputs, you can name each one and have a different input assigned to it. And of course, plug all of your gear into the different inputs of your sound card. If you have 2 inputs, you'll need to plug and then unplug your gear from your sound card. And so the input names won't really make sense if they're labeled keys and mic. We could make these names generic by calling them stereo in and mono in. These names will pop up in the mixer or in the input selection of the inspector. See the video on recording audio and the mixer coming up. You can even have a 5.1 surround sound input bus. Let's say you're recording a surround mix of 6 channels and you don't know where to begin. Simply click Add Bus and choose 5.1 and select your inputs. The left, right, and mono are there to help you see what your bus consists of. If you have a 5.1 bus, it will show you surround speaker names. This column tells us what format the bus is in. This shows us the audio interface we are using and the channels on the interface. The same can be done for outputs. The only difference here is that you can turn the click on and off for the output bus. Don't try to click here. Make sure you click above the device port names in the same column as the bus name. If for any reason you don't hear the click and you have all the right buttons turned on and the metronome setup page looks good, it may be that you don't have click on for that bus. Once you have the perfect setup, you'll definitely want to store presets. The inputs and the outputs have individual preset sections. It's good not to have a whole bunch of inputs and outputs turned on and running all the time. This uses up a small bit of processing power that can become noticeable if you have a large project. By using presets, you can have inputs for just your drums, guitars, vocals, etc. Only use what you need and then turn it off. One interesting thing to note is that if you have a stereo audio file and you're sending it to a multi-channel bus, such as 5.1, you can create a child bus. When you create a child bus, it acts like a stereo sub-bus within the bus. Confused? Yeah, it's pretty confusing, but we'll sort it all out. This is what you would do with a 5.1 audio file. You simply send it to the 5.1 bus. This is an example of 6 individual audio files that make up a 5.1 mix, sent to the separate outputs. And this is an example of 3 stereo files that make up a 5.1 mix. You send these to the child bus. For example, if you have a stereo audio file, you can send it easily to the left and right surround outs. This makes things so much easier. You can also define a default input. The current default input is the bus with the speaker icon. This is used when you make a new audio track. This is the default input bus that is used. Some inputs are mono and some are stereo, and so Cubase will match up the correct input to the type of track that you are creating. This is Cubase's way of helping to speed things up. There is also a default output bus, so whenever you create a new track, the output of that track will be assigned to that bus. Well, that pretty much covers VST Connections. Don't forget that Group Effects is covered in Level 2 of this tutorial series, and the rest here are in Level 3.